Today, I'm going to tell you a wild story, written right here, about a man who bet literally everything, and in the worst moment, when he had lost it all, he doubled down. Now, this story about a man who, out of the respect for his request for anonymity, will call Stephen. This story will highlight the power of Bitcoin to create and to take extreme amounts of wealth in just months. Now, I suspect the request for privacy comes from the fact that this story is very similar to another quite famous cryptocurrency story, the story of the Dogecoin millionaire. I'm sure a lot of you know about this crazy story, but for those of you that don't, in short, this man, Glauber Contesoto, went all in, literally all in, as in $250,000 worth of his savings combined with credit card purchases on Bitcoin in 2020. This insane gamble somehow paid off, launching his net worth into the stratosphere at a whopping $3 million at one point. He was urged, he was begged by the likes of Graham Stephan and Andre Jick to sell at least some of it, as this was quite literally life-changing money. Well, he didn't. He refused, for whatever reason, call it blind faith, call it recklessness, and that insane windfall fell to just $50,000 at one point. And this story gets wilder. Now, 3 years later, with this new bull run, his fortune has skyrocketed again, most recently highlighted by Andre Jick, topping a whopping $1.5 million. And who would have guessed, yet again, he's refusing to sell. My goodness. This story has made him famous, or infamous, and he has received both massive amounts of praise and hate. And at this point, we enter another story. Stephen's story. So let's get started. Stephen is currently 37 years old, which means that when this whole debacle started, he was about 33. And Stephen's foray into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin started out very similar to how it started out probably for millions of others. It was late 2020, in the middle of economic lockdown, with stimulus money in everyone's pockets and in the middle of one of the greatest bull runs in history, the cryptocurrency bull run of 2021. And while Bitcoin specifically had been on an uptrend for most of 2020, it's safe to say that this bull run truly started to get some steam when it broke its previous all-time highs in around November of 2020. Now, not to get lost into too many of the details, but Stephen was working from home at this point, as were many other people, and he couldn't seem to escape all the memes, all the tweets, and honestly, all the FOMO, fear of missing out, that surrounded this epic run. Now, Stephen had already known about Bitcoin for some time, but he never owned any of it. And as you'll see in this story, that was about to change at literally the worst time possible. But before we get there, as November turned to December and as December turned to the new year, the price of not just Bitcoin, but Ethereum, Dogecoin, Sol, FTM, and tons of other tokens kept going up and up and up. And Stephen, working from home on the computer, could not escape the constant talk about cryptocurrency and the talk about real life-changing money being made by basically everyone except himself. And that is honestly where this deep-seated FOMO, fear of missing out, started to creep in. Not only was he seeing crypto millionaires pop up left and right on Instagram, on Twitter, and even in news articles, but his literal own friends were making a killing. One of them made $32,000 in what seemed like just a couple of months. Stephen honestly didn't even believe him until his friend came over to Stephen's house and showed him the transfer from Coinbase into his Bank of America account in person. But Stephen, a relatively prudent person, held steadfast. It's not a real asset, he told himself. It's probably all going to implode, he reassured himself. But Bitcoin and the rest of the entire cryptocurrency market kept moving up. And now, you even had people on the news calling for $1 million per Bitcoin. $1 million Stephen thought to himself, no fucking way. He didn't believe it, but he wanted to. Bitcoin was just a hair under $50,000 at this point, and he had personally seen it go from less than $10,000 to close to 50 grand in literally just a few months, and it was eating him alive. He wanted to believe that $1 million per Bitcoin was possible because that meant that he was still at the ground level. Maybe if he just bought half a Bitcoin, he thought to himself, or maybe just one Bitcoin, that could literally be life-changing money. in just a couple of years if these predictions came true. And these predictions seemed possible. Everyone was saying so. The FOMO finally got to Stephen. And unfortunately, it got to Stephen in March of 2021. Stephen bought an entire Bitcoin in March of 2021. And Stephen withdrew almost all of his savings to buy that Bitcoin. He went from owning none of it to being all in the blink of an eye. And trust me when I say this, the story gets even crazier. Now, his justification for this, well, he wasn't dabbling in those altcoins. He never would. He was buying a real asset, unlike those other coins who were created by God knows who. He was buying Bitcoin, the original, the real deal. Now, Stephen had a wife, Linda, and she was absolutely not happy with his decision. But these savings were Stephen's personal savings from before their recent marriage just a couple of years ago. So while she made it clear that she was absolutely not happy with this decision, she did understand and she tried to support him. At first, all seemed to go well. Bitcoin kept inching up, but not nearly as much as before. And Stephen tried to make light of the situation and joke that, of course, it would stop moving much the moment he bought in. Well, it was about to move a ton, just not in the direction he wanted it to move. After basically doing nothing for more than a month, Bitcoin finally moved down. At first, Stephen thought nothing of this because during the last month, even though Bitcoin didn't really go anywhere, it definitely had some wild swings, both up and down. So at first glance, business as usual. But as May turned to June, it was obvious that something was very wrong. Bitcoin was experiencing its first major pullback of this bull run, and it was huge. The price fell from safely above $60,000 into the low 30,000s, which means Stephen's liquid net worth also fell from safely above 60,000 into the low 30,000s. He was officially in the red, in the deep red. And for anyone who's ever traded, invested, gambled, bet, started a business, or had real stakes on the line, this feeling sucks. It can drive people crazy, basically, in a sense. And that's exactly what was happening to Stephen. He searched the web, he searched Twitter and Reddit for some faith, for some justification. And of course, the internet did exactly what the internet is best at doing: confirming our biases. Diamond hands, Twitter said. Dollar cost average, Reddit said. You have to have some skin in the game to make some money, Instagram said. And little by little, the more Stephen researched, the more and more he fundamentally believed in what Bitcoin stood for. Little by little, he started to have faith. Faith that this wasn't even a negative, but an opportunity. An opportunity to add more at a lower entry price. But he only had $10,000 left in his savings, and he wanted to make this opportunity, this golden opportunity, count. So he did something crazy, something that most people wouldn't even consider. He sold his car to fund a larger purchase into Bitcoin. And his justification here? Well, he worked from home. He didn't need a car. Plus, the car market was red hot, and he had a ton of equity sitting in his vehicle. And when Bitcoin goes to $100,000 or $1 million, who cares, he said. He'll just buy himself a new one. Stephen had officially, by all standards, fell headfirst into FOMO. But that's exactly what he did. He sold his car and he bought another $40,000 worth of Bitcoin, bringing his total investment in June of 2021 to right around $100,000. He was now truly all in. And what was about to happen next would only solidify his faith right before everything turned for the worse. Between June and July of 2021, Stephen's borderline insane decision caused him stress, restless nights, and emotions all across the board. But then between July and November, it all seemed to work out. Not only did Bitcoin continue to rise, but it smashed through its previous high and rose steadily into the 60,000s. Stephen was relieved. His red streak was finally over. But he was also invigorated. Reddit was right. Instagram, Twitter were right. These last few months were an opportunity that just made him about $25,000. At this point, he had only wished that he had put in more. He only wished that he was as brave as the Dogecoin millionaire. He only wished that he could have maxed out his credit cards, or taken out a personal loan, whatever, to have just been able to buy some more. But honestly, he felt on top of the world. But as we know now, looking back, that was all about to change, because the end of 2021 would be the last time Stephen would be in the green for a stretch of more than 2 years. And what he did at the time is both nerve-wracking and honestly unfathomable. You see, at this point, he was all in, mentally and monetarily. And at this point, after spending months and months on cryptocurrency forums and watching video after video, you could say that he had officially become part of the movement. He truly did believe in what Bitcoin stood for. It was the people's currency. It was the people's gold. So as Bitcoin fell and fell and fell, and as scandal after scandal rocked the sector, Stephen only became more solid in that belief and in his conviction about the future of Bitcoin. And that unwavering faith, fueled by the internet, fueled by necessity, since his entire net worth sat in this single asset, that unwavering faith would lead him to do something that pretty much 99% of people on this planet would scream at him not to do. And that something would come into view in October of 2022. But before we talk about that, we have to understand where we are in this timeline. Stephen was massively in the red, not just on his initial investment, but on his second investment as well, as Bitcoin was well under $30,000. And his home life was starting to suffer because of this. His wife, Linda, was upset, saddened, and honestly just didn't understand. The man she married was prudent. And before this, he had never invested in pretty much anything except his employer's 401k plan. She loved Stephen, but she honestly couldn't understand what he was doing or why he was doing it. She told him many times as Bitcoin fell to cut his losses and to please not put everything they had worked for on the line. And this made Stephen mad, because to him, it felt like she didn't trust him and didn't support his decision to invest in Bitcoin, which of course nowadays he himself even admits that he must have sounded crazy and that there is only so much one can take. And he would find out soon enough that there is very much truly only so much that one can take. And that's because in October of 2022, he would do it again. He would do something that most people just would not do. He would add to his position. He would buy more Bitcoin. How, you might ask? He was already all in. Well, he owned a house. It was the house that him and his wife lived in, but it was his from long before their union. And he happened to have equity in this house, quite a bit in fact, due to the red-hot housing market that had pushed his home value to the moon more than Bitcoin. And he had about $20,000 sitting in an equity loan from a previous complete HVAC replacement, which ended up costing him less than expected. Yeah, he did. He doubled down. In the middle of a crypto winter, he bought more Bitcoin with home equity in the middle of a Bitcoin bear market. And unfortunately, that was the last straw for his marriage. His wife had had enough. She said he had become reckless. She said that he was putting their literal future well-being on the line. She said that he started to resemble more of a gambler than he did the prudent man she married. Now, they didn't get a divorce, although that was very much on the table. But she did move in with her parents who lived close by, and she told him that for now, they should probably consider themselves separated. Stephen cried. She cried. But he understood. He understood that from the outside, he was acting crazy. He loved her. He didn't want this. He told her that. But he also told her that this was something he felt strongly about and that he was going to see it through. She shook her head. She got in the Uber, and for the next year and a half, they would only talk for a handful of times. It was clear that the love was still there, but both of them were very much at odds with each other. And for the next year and a half, Stephen continued to monitor Bitcoin. He continued to wait. He continued to watch. And while he did, he continued to live at his house and work from home. And thank God he had a stable job, because for the next year and a half, Bitcoin did basically nothing. It went up a little, it went down a little. But for the most part, it did nothing until now. until 2024. And if you've been keeping up with the news, or perhaps you yourself are even invested in Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptos, then you know that Bitcoin just broke its all-time high. It broke above $70,000 for the first time in history. Stephen again feels on top of the world. All the paper losses he had experienced are gone. Stephen's total investment of $120,000 at one point virtually wiped out is now in the green, sitting at around $180,000 worth of Bitcoin. And I'm sure most of us know how that sense of relief feels. It feels good. But here's the thing. After all of this, after this giant roller coaster ride, after the massive amount of risk, after losing the love of his life, and after almost 3 years, Stephen still has faith, which means he still holds the majority, not all, but the majority of his Bitcoin. Unlike the Dogecoin millionaire, Stephen did take some profits, but not much. He recouped about $60,000 of his investment by selling close to one Bitcoin as it was touching its previous all-time highs at around $69,000. He says he did this to lower his overall risk. Finally, something I can agree with. But at the same time, that still leaves him very exposed based on his initial $120,000 investment. And it still leaves him plenty of room to end up in the red again. Which begs the question, is he a genius or is he crazy? I mean, the amount of risk he's put himself through and continues to put himself through really only leaves those two options. I don't know. But I will say this, as someone with a degree in finance who invests their own money, risk must be balanced by reward. That is a fundamental concept of finance. And outside risks for undersized returns over time can lead to the total loss of one's portfolio. And if we were going to go by the book, really no more than 5 to 10% of a portfolio should be invested in a single asset, let alone over 100% by literally leveraging your home equity. At the end of the day, people like the Dogecoin millionaire and Stephen have extreme conviction in their ideas, and they have a willingness to see it through, even if it costs them everything. Is that genius or is that crazy? I don't know.